Greetings. Today is August the 28th, 2012. This video is put together because of concerns of the citizens in Brooks County. I've been getting calls about the Quitman Free Press and columns that were written by a person in the community I understand has been writing for a long time, Harrell. That's Harrell. I've been receiving information that he writes articles in the Quitman Free Press, and the president is Robert E. Tribble, general manager, and G. Knight. And of course, the Quitman Free Press started back in 1876. This is the only newspaper in this little small southern town. It is also the home of the Quitman 10+2. Looking back into the history of Quitman and Brooks County, it is also known as the county wherein history records as the Week of Terror that took place, wherein 13 to 15 black African Americans were murdered. And yet very little to nothing are being reported in the Quitman Free Press or any other newspaper about those murders. And of course, we hope to talk about that in the very near future. But today, we want to talk about Harrell Column, Sound the Alarm. And the subject of it is Racism is Alive and Well. Now, if a person outside of Brooks County and Quitman, in my most humble opinion, read this article, this column, they would believe that at least the editor or the president or the general manager would have an opposing viewpoint printed in the Quitman Free Press for the sake of fairness and diversity and respecting the citizens in Quitman and Brooks County. To be brief, racism is not a subject people want to talk about or acknowledge. However, it is very real, and it is not going away by being ignored. That is true. It's not going away by being ignored. Now, as I've said before, much of the news in Quitman are not reported in the Quitman Free Press. It's ignored. The Quitman 10. I don't even want to get in. Let me try to stick with this. It's going to be hard. Let me stick with this. Going through the column by Mr. Harrell, it talks about other nations and how other nations have had to deal with hatred and racism, and he talks about Africa and Central and South America and all of Europe, and the racism encounter was not directed toward the writer, and that he named the many other nations. I mean, he go through a lot of nations talking about the Chinese and the Koreans and Japanese, for example, the India and Pakistan, Afghanistan, the Congo and Africa and Iraq and Iran and Uganda and Libya and Europe and Germany and Poland and Italy and England and Ireland and France and Sweden and Finland. And he go right on through. He talks about the differences between the Kurds of Turkey and Iraq and Iran, and just go Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia and on and on and on and on and on and on. And all that is good. Appreciate the information, Mr. Harrell. Then he come down and he really, to me, in my most humble opinion, he's jumped from there to the Bible. And then it says that Ishmael and Isaac, also between the children of Israel and Egypt, all this stuff existed. Then down here it say New Testament. Now I'm finna get to the beef for why I'm drawing attention to this particular column. And see, I doubt very seriously that my comments will be published in the Quitman Free Press. And so we're doing it on YouTube because I want everybody, not only you, but you too, to understand what's going on in Brooks County. And then we're going to define, hold on, just a minute, hold on. The New Testament racism, look now, New Testament racism existed between the Jews and the Gentiles, certainly between the people of Judah and those of Samaria. They were not even supposed to talk with one another. The institution of slavery came out of the attitude of racism based on one nation conquest of another. Slavery had nor has anything to do with color. Look, slavery has nothing to do with color. Keep that in mind. All people, certainly to include Africa, were being enslaved by their captors before and during the time of the pharaohs. Racism, like sin of any kind, cannot be eliminated. It is with us. However, like sin of any kind, it can be overcome. Then he goes on to say, it is not overcome by ignorance, and that is so true, or avoidance. It is overcome by truth. I love that, Mr. Harrell. It is overcome by truth. And that's what we want to talk about today, is truth. Now, the book called Undoing Racism by Ron Chisholm and Michael Washington is a book that was taught, and some people at universities went and referenced this book back in the early years of my simple and narrow study. But I love the definition that is in this book, and not only in this book, in other books, that defines racism, short form, as prejudice plus power equals racism. In other words, if you do not have any power, then it's hard for you to be a racist. Now, I know many of you disagree with that, but when you really look down at what it says, the People's Institute views racism as an equation in which the formula reads race prejudice plus power equals racism. Since a definition of each of the concepts inherent within the formula is necessary in order to understand the equation, let us begin with the definition of the word race. Well, I guess most of you already know that, but my point is that prejudice plus power, race prejudice plus power equals racism. Now, if the owners of the Quitman Free Press possess the power for Mr. Jack Harrell to publish anything he wants, whether it's being considerate or sensitive to black African Americans and how it may offend them along with white people, they are in positions of power. So they pretty near can write anything they want. They're in a position to call a black person or a white person to respond to what Mr. Jack Harrell scribed in the paper. I'm not calling him a racist. He said truth is what will help eliminate racism. So if Mr. Jack Harrell can write every week from the viewpoint of what we may call a conservative or a person of an era that has gone past us with absolutely no rebuttal, no viewpoint from that he gives in the paper. So that seems to empower him and possibly to make others believe that he is very up on information and that this is a reality of life. However, race prejudice plus power equals racism. Jesus said, since the Bible was quoted in here, the New Testament, Jesus said to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now, what does that mean? That means that if the Quitman Free Press from 8/17, whenever it started, can dominate what is published in this paper without having opposing viewpoints, this means that we are justified in asking a question to Mr. Jack Harrell. Is this published article in alignment with the truth that Jesus spoke? That is, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Reducing that to its lowest term, wanting your neighbor to have that which you have, Mr. Harrell. That means simply that you should want someone to use as many words to refute or rebut or approve of the articles with an S that you write. There should be a response to them. So, and week after week, the people in Quitman say they get letters just like this, all from a conservative viewpoint, all criticizing the President of the United States, the Executive Commander-in-Chief of our black sons and daughters, white sons and daughters, Japanese sons and daughters, Korean sons and daughters, Muslim, Christian, Jews, Hindu, and others, sons and daughters, Executive Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. But they must hear all of this negativity about their Commander-in-Chief while they are fighting and defending this country. Yet, Jesus said, love your neighbor as you love yourself. So that means as they criticize the Commander-in-Chief, in my most humble opinion, dealing with truth and justice, they should get somebody who sees some good in the first black African-American president, and it should be written as a column in the Quitman Free Press, not just one-sided. After all, they quoted the Bible, they quoted the New Testament, but the Jesus that I know, whether he existed or not, some people don't believe he existed. Well, even if he never existed, his words tell us about love. He tells us about equality. He tells us how to forgive. It tells us about being fair. He tells us about loving your neighbor as you love, you get it, yourself. And so this is what to modern day Christians that align themselves with the real Jesus believe in. We believe in forgiving. We believe that if the president is in error, we are supposed to go to him and try to help him, not to tear him down. In fact, we are not to tear any human being down. That's the way it works under the Christian faith that my ancestors brought me up under. And so I want to close this out now just by saying that we cannot, I'm sure, get equal space to respond to Mr. Jack Harrell. And so I won't waste my time by writing a letter to the editor. I've done that 2 or 3 years ago and I never was published. And I'm here in Quitman from time to time, but I live here in Valdosta, and I'm very seldom published in the Valdosta Daily Times, and that's just fine with me because I like YouTube and I like blogging. I used to send my papers in only to have them to go unpublished to refute what is published in the conservative newspapers here in South Georgia. And so we will be bringing to your attention, not just in Brooks County and Lowndes County and Valdosta in the state of Georgia, but we want people around the world to know what people must go through here in South Georgia because of mindsets that seem like they were brought in to the modern day from centuries ago. And we just want to do what we can to show you that yes, Mr. Jack Harrell is correct. Racism is alive and well. But we must understand that the equation is race, prejudice, plus power equals racism. Which means that if you are without power, you cannot deny any human being a job. You can't deny any human being from buying a car, from buying a home, from redlining them if you're not in power. If you're not in power, you can't discriminate against anybody really. You can hate. See, the People's Institute make a distinction between hate and racism. In other words, you can be responding to the actions of others. But when it comes down to the real deal of racism, race prejudice plus power. Race prejudice plus power equals racism. I like that definition because after all, when blacks came to this country, he states, and Mr. Harrell states, that it's not about skin color. It's not about skin color. But when my ancestors came to these shores in the year 1555, aboard a slave ship called Jesus, captained by one Sir John Hawkins, a slave trader, they were not enslaved because they were ignorant. They were enslaved because of the color of their skin and the strength of their backs. For instance, a white person can come from Africa to America, even in the 1900s, and his skin color would have gotten him a job, local, state, federal government. His skin color would have allowed him to go into a restaurant, travel up and down the highways across America, to eat in any restaurant that he so chose. He could register to vote once he became a citizen, but if it was dependent on his skin color, he wouldn't have to wait all these years and decades just to fight to get a right to vote, because his skin color made him have the complexion for the protection. His skin color gave him the complexion for the protection. If you were black in skin, you could not get in. And so, we may not want to acknowledge that today in 2012, the spirit of Lester Maddox, the spirit of Eugene Bull Connors, the spirit of Governor Wallace before he came to light, the spirit of others who hearts and minds was filled with the following and title of a Christian and patriot. But in the eyes of God, they were reverse patriots, reverse Christians in the eyes of God. Instead of hating, instead of loving, they hated. Instead of moving forward, they stood still or backed up. And they wanted to keep things that way. But the Jesus of creation, the God of creation, the Muhammad of righteousness, the Buddha of righteousness, the son of Amram and Yoshabel Moses, all wanted, or should have wanted, what God wanted. And God said, I have no respect of persons. For what I say unto one, I say unto all. And if God say unto Mr. Jack Harrell, we want you to publish this article in the Quitman Free Press, then the God of my ancestors would say, Mr. Blackshot, we want you to give opposing views, because after all, we all are Americans, and we all go to war for this country to defend this country. And so we want to be fair, and we want to be equal. Today is August 28, 2012. Mr. Jack Harrell, we will watch your writings. And to the people of Brooks County, how do you live in a city with a newspaper like the Quitman Free Press every week comes out negatively against you and who you are, the very essence of who black people are in Quitman. To read all of this viewpoints, this man's viewpoints, and you never give yours, that's unpatriotic, number one. And from my observation, it's not what Jesus would do. Jesus wants both sides of the story. After all, as Mr. Jack Harrell said, it's all about truth. And truth is what's going to undo racism. Not publishing one side or criticizing the first black African-American president who have never enslaved one American person, never denied any American citizen the right to vote, never labeled anybody 3/5 of a human being, never kept another American from owning a gun to defend himself or his family. He never issued laws that caused children to be taken away from their mother and father and taken to somebody else's farm to work for slave labor. He has never done these things. He has never put anybody in an oven. He has never, well, should I say more? And so, if he has not done those things, then why is he called a Hitler? Why is he called a clown? And all these other names that we have never seen a president in the United States called before. So is it because he's black? In fact, is it because he's white or have white in him? Most of us got white in us anyway. I have white in me, not by choice. White blood. I know my lineage back to a point. And so, Jesus did say, my beautiful brother, and ye shall know the truth. You mentioned truth in here. So where are the opposing views, Mr. Quitman Free Press? Where are the opposing views? We'll be watching, we'll be talking, but we want education to be in the forefront of what goes on in our world of August 2012 and beyond. Peace be unto you. Bye-bye. We're gone.